Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, June 1st, 2023. Now, finally, at last, time for the new month to arrive. We've been hyping it for 2 days here. And time for a new show that we sort of hype every day. And, wow, as I said in the morning post today, no Thursday has ever felt more like a Saturday. We usually worry about days that feel like Fridays. I just can't believe that yesterday wasn't Friday. I think the finality of having a graduation ceremony on a Wednesday is part of what has thrown me off. And, you know, I've been talking about it all week, and probably for even longer, that this is the end of the KITM era of any background noise being attributable to secondary public education, at any rate. And now that is done, and the graduation successful, more or less, well, right up until the point where the tassel fell off somewhere, and we don't know where the tassel is, and that's unfortunate and sad. But you know, the rest of the graduation went well. The tassel was intact for the ceremony. That's the important part. And everything went well, and all the graduating was done properly, and that's nice. But yeah, it does leave you with this weird feeling. It was an evening graduation, Wednesday in the middle of the week, and of course, the production staff off from work during the day in order to prepare for the graduation, which largely really for us was about us eating lunch or otherwise preparing for it. The graduate himself more or less slept until it was time to get ready to go to graduation. So, you know, there wasn't much preliminary celebration, but we were preparing for things. And then the day culminates and the graduation, the ceremony is over, and then, you know, okay, so the high school career is over, but the rest of the world goes on, and it's the middle of the week. It's still Thursday, and it's not even Friday, and the whole thing has sort of felt like we were heading into a weekend, and it's just not so. Okay, we're all ready to go. John Shiflett's ready to go. I was actually beginning the show, and this time I was ready, so that when John introduced the show was happening on Mastodon, I was able to retweet it very quickly. And yes, he notes for the record, we're creating a new day. June 1st is now commemorated this way. Our good social media friend SFDB noted this morning. This is, I guess, the third anniversary of the Donald Trump photo op outside of the church, name of which I constantly forget, which is across the street from the White House, the President's Church, as they frequently call it, which he, of course, tear-gassed his way over to in order to take that infamous, I suppose, picture of himself hoisting a Bible upside down and taking the picture to show how strong and resolute he was by calling out the military and paramilitary and deputizing all sorts of people, and so that he could force his way through protesters and display the upside-down Bible. Yes, it's the one at Lafayette Square Park, Greg, but it's John's Saint. I can never remember. And well, at any rate, it's frequently attended by presidents because of its proximity to the White House. So yeah, John just calls it Happy June 1st, Happy Bible and Tear Gas Appreciation Day. Quite a mix. And something that should not be forgotten, and something that prompted me to pull out the old No State Funeral for Trump hashtag. Okay. So, all right, we roll forward and mark other occasions as well. There's all sorts of things going on. I put a number of things in Pocket this morning. We can't possibly get to them all, but all relevant. And today, of course, we have the results, and we can talk with Greg. Here we go. Talk with Greg about what? I'm going to wait until he answers the phone, and then I can say we can talk to Greg about the results of yesterday's vote. That's another thing we've been building up to for a long time, it feels like. This is a lot of days to be talking about one single bill, one single vote, but it was such a cliffhanger, et cetera, just not necessarily in terms of, well, to some extent in terms of what was going to happen. But then once the outlines were there, we still were wondering, how will it go in the Rules Committee? And then, of course, the question became, how many Republicans will McCarthy be able to put together in support of the bill in the House? How many Democratic votes will be needed? Now we have the answers, and, semi-anticlimactic, but good. That's a good thing to do when the alternative was default and the destruction of the world financial system. Good morning, Greg.
Well, there was that in the background. By the way,
Right.
Our procedural friend Ringwis over on Twitter helps explain how yesterday, when you were doing the show in the beginning, and it was May 31st, but you wanted it to be June 1st.
Right.
If you had adopted Senate rules, you could have done it.
Could I jump forward? to
Yeah,
June
see,
1st?
he says, look,
I don't know if
last
I've
night,
ever seen them do that.
what happened is that this thing passed, and we'll get to the details of that. So then the bill goes over to the Senate.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
So what happens?
I don't
So
know.
first you ask the bill to be read a first time. Mm-hmm. Then you object to a second reading.
Oh, yes.
Then you
Okay, I
adjourn
see.
for a few seconds.
Right.
And then you ask for the bill to be read a second time. And then you object to further proceeding. The point being, you can't read the bill twice in the same legislative day. But by adjourning for a few seconds, it's now tomorrow. Had you done that on the show, you could have gone from May 31st to June 1st
All
with
right.
a legislative procedure that is perfectly legitimate according to whatever rules people use to run the Senate.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's right. They have done that. They've used that procedure. I haven't really thought of it in terms of changing the calendar day, but that's exactly what's necessary to do in order to get to the second reading so that you can move the bill forward and get it on the floor. You're supposed to read it for a couple days in a row. I don't know why people can't read the thing twice in a single day, but that's the rule. But usually we see them
Well, you can with
manipulating
unanimous
the
consent,
calendar.
but you're never going to get from these
Right.
clowns.
Right, that's true. Usually I see them, we usually talk about them keeping the same legislative day open for longer and keeping the calendar turned back rather than jumping forward. But that's true. Yeah, that's a good
does
point.
anybody really know what time it is?
Does
Does
anybody?
anybody really care?
Yeah, I guess not. You can make it to what? That's one of the
And
prerogatives of the Senate.
that's how it could have been the beginning of the month yesterday.
Yeah. So, all right. I wonder. Yeah. Did they ever? How would they could just make it May 32nd. I suppose.
Yeah, something like that. But they'll probably shave a day off. So, if things go well,
Daylight
according
savings time.
to Chuck Schumer, then they could have the bill done and on Biden's desk by the weekend. It all
Finally,
depends, I
the
suppose, upon amendments, not having them. Schumer's going to have them. But I think, if I'm not mistaken, if any of them actually pass, it has to go back to the House, so that's bad because that'll waste a few days.
Yes, but it is also a power the Senate likes to use and abuse, and to send to send a bill back to the House without with a change so that they show everybody who's boss. Essentially, when the House thinks they're going to jam the Senate and hand them something that they can't amend, they frequently like to prove that they can. But if you're really running out of time, then they try
See,
not
that's
to.
the thing. Everything that happened in the House yesterday, from the afternoon vote on the rule to the evening vote on the bill, basically those who said, for the most part, excluding the House Freedom Caucus, for the most part, the House Republicans really don't want to doom the entire world to a catastrophic economic meltdown. And those who took that point of view, I think, covered it mostly correct and got it better than those who didn't. So we were making fun of that on Twitter this morning. Liam Donovan and our friend Ringwis were having a convo, for example, and Liam was desk pounding his head because the media couldn't stop being the media. And he cited this headline, for example: debt ceiling deal clears key House hurdle, but Senate could still stymie the process.
Okay.
Of course they could, but they won't. And Ringwis said, the Senate's passed the bill. Who's to say whether Biden will actually sign it?
Yeah, right. I mean,
And what if Biden took 10
technically-
days? He's afforded under law, and there's a catastrophic default because of it,
he doesn't design it.
right?
Yeah.
And so, my contribution to that thread was, this really gets to the heart of how the entire Congress is covered. What if Biden forgets where he puts the papers he was supposed to sign? Our panel of congressmen who lost their elections weighs in.
Well,
That's pretty much what you
need
get
to.
on cable news.
Yeah. Well, they need to have something to talk about, I guess. But sometimes it's important. It's important that that be covered somewhere in the background in case it happens later in the future, and you can point back and say, "Remember, I told you what happens when the papers don't move." But
Yes.
but they will move. But it's important.
But
I
they
don't know.
will
It's
move.
important
But
to
it's important know
document
what
how it
happens if
happens,
they don't, or if they get lost.
right? But every once in a while, it's nice to. I mean, it might not be the way to deal with television news, and that's just a matter of them saying, well, we got to fill 24 hours. But at least it's, I don't know, maybe it's a good thing that they decide to fill the 24 hours with esoteric education about the mechanics of the process. But somehow they make it feel dumb instead of interesting.
Well, but let's make you smart about the mechanics of the process.
Yeah,
So
like
I
that
took
would
a
be
couple
helpful.
of screenshots yesterday so I would
all
remember
right.
the numbers. And on the rule,
Yes.
which comes before the vote
Yeah.
on the bill, on the rule,
Has to.
it passed 241 to 187.
241, 187. Okay.
Okay. Republicans, 189 to 29, nay. So 29 Republican members voted no on the bill.
The bill. Okay.
On the rule.
On the rule. All right. Back to the rule.
29
no's on the
Republicans
rule.
voted nay.
Okay.
189 voted yay.
Uh-huh.
Yay.
Yay.
But the thing is, that's not enough to pass.
No, ordinarily
So
that would be trouble.
watching it, I was watching the thing, and it worked out exactly as we suggested on the show. Democratic no votes started to pile up, eventually reaching 158. But the 52 yes votes that powered the bill, powered the rule to pass, the 52 Democratic votes all came in at the end, after time had run out. No Democratic yes vote was there until they saw how many Republican votes there was going to be.
Okay. Yeah, that's the reflexive vote for the minority. They just vote no on rules, even if they don't mind the rule so much. They just sort of vote no as a rule, because normally there's enough members of the majority to carry it across the finish
Right, and they
line
wanted
anyway.
to give the message that, look, were we in power,
We are
we
the
wouldn't even be
opposition.
voting on this
Right.
stupid thing in the first place.
Yes.
So it's a reflex. But 52 Democrats, in a disciplined manner, waited until the end and then made this rule pass.
Yeah.
Credit
Okay.
Hakeem Jeffries.
Yes.
And that's the point. He
Okay.
had his entire caucus. I got that right this
Right.
time. I always get that wrong.
No,
The Republican conference could not pass the rule by themselves.
right.
29 members of the Republican conference voted no, thwarting McCarthy's desire to have this rule passed, and he was saved by Hakeem Jeffries, who organized 52 votes and actually texted them, go.
Oh.
You can do it. And then, boom, all of a sudden 52 votes appear.
All right.
It was amazing
That's
and
interesting they
really
used
quite
text
fun to
for it.
watch. So credit Hakeem Jeffries, which gets
In
to a
case you're
point I'll
wondering.
make later about who gets credit.
Okay. Well, in case anyone was wondering, could he perform the same tricks as Nancy Pelosi? Yes.
The answer is
And
yeah.
So there you go. That's
Okay.
that's good.
Then they debated. I watched the debate.
An
It was
hour.
sort of weird, but there it was.
Short.
And then they vote on the bill.
All right.
Everybody expected this to pass, but they thought it would pass with about 250 votes. It actually passed 314 to 117.
Extra votes.
Extra votes. Republicans, yay, 149. Nay, 71. Contrast that with 189-29 on the rule. More Republicans voted for the rule than voted for the bill.
Okay.
There were 71 Republicans who wanted this bill to fail and would have been happy with catastrophic economic collapse. 71 Republicans. So that gives you an idea. It's basically, a little more than a third of the conference there.
Okay. Yes. I mean, maybe they would have. I'm sure some of them would have said, no, I don't want the economy to fail. I just want
vote
different
no,
circumstances.
Yes, but you know what? When push comes to shove, put on your big boy pants. What are you going to do?
Right.
I don't care what you say. I want to see what you do. 71 voted nay.
That is
149 Republicans voted to save the world from economic collapse. That's not enough to pass the bill.
No.
Democrats, 165 to 46.
Okay.
Hakeem Jeffries says, come on, troops, just go do your thing. 165 Democratic votes, 149 Republican votes, adds up to 314. Huge total, way more than the whip counters in the press were expecting. Okay. And that was primarily due to Hakeem Jeffries organizing everybody to get this done. So, of course, today's headlines are all about what a wonderful job Kevin McCarthy did.
Well, he's the Speaker of the House, supposedly.
He is the Speaker of the House. So, you know, and my acknowledgement of that was somebody who deserves credit, but will get too much is Kevin McCarthy.
Okay.
Somebody who deserves credit and will get too little is Hakeem Jeffries.
All right.
And I just illustrated why. Okay. And somebody who deserves credit and get just about the right amount is Joe Biden. And that's because that's how the ecosystem is shaped. You write about the president, you write about the speaker, you write almost nothing about the minority leader in the House.
Yeah.
Even when it was Nancy Pelosi. And sometimes that's just not really what's going on. And in this case, that was not really what's going on.
Okay. I think that's a fairly, I don't know what, a fairly thorough presentation of it. And that's what's happening behind the scenes. And if you weren't looking all week, I suppose, you'd come away with a slightly different picture about Kevin McCarthy actually having done something and led somewhere in some way.
Kevin McCarthy did something that nobody expected him to do. That's because you weren't paying attention to what the Democrats are doing.
Yeah. All right.
Because you read all these stories about both sides are giving their leaders fits. Well, actually, not on the Democratic side. You know, we said all along, the Republicans are yelling and screaming, and the Democrats are saying, I don't know, I have to think about this.
Yeah.
Those are not equal positions.
Interestingly, I guess we won't spend any time, discussing. It's just sort of a great illustration of the way you have to interpret things, that there is nuance to these things. We just said, what a terrible bunch of nihilistic a-holes the 71 Republicans who voted no are. But we don't feel the same way about the Democrats who voted no, because they're known to have voted no for different reasons. But we just said, well, you got to take responsibility and do your job, etc. But that's why it's important to report the backstory with Hakeem Jeffries and organizing the caucus and saying how many of you can vote this way and how many of you can vote that way. And then everybody gets to do their thing. And I don't know, that way it's much more strategic. If it's not really your responsibility to do the governing because you're in the minority, you do sort of get that flexibility of splitting your votes up and covering your bases. But, Republicans, I guess the bigger story there is another way of looking at it is that 71 Republicans aren't interested in checking in with their leadership and taking cues and, splitting the work equitably among themselves. Whereas Democrats, even those in opposition to the legislation, first coordinate their voting with their leadership, which is amazing because it's always the Democrats who get labeled as being in disarray.
Well, again, Jim McGovern, the ranking member of Rules, and we went over this the other day, spoke to why he would be voting no. And he was representing, I think, many of the progressives in the Democratic caucus and said, this bill hurts people, and I just can't find it in myself to vote yes on a bill that hurts people.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it has to pass because we can't afford a catastrophic meltdown. So
more people.
Ro Khanna said, look, I'm voting no, but if they need my vote, I'm yes.
Yeah.
He just said it outright. And so, the 40 are different than the 70.
They are. I'm available to do the least damage if necessary. And save the world economy versus the others who said, no, light it on fire. That's actually a good thing, just like ivermectin is.
Right. I'll eat this crab sandwich if I have to, but I don't want to. And I'm
Yeah.
telling you, it's a crab sandwich.
Right.
Okay, fine. I get that. I understand that.
Versus I'll eat this horse paste and you should too.
The 71 didn't come out and say, if McCarthy needed me, I'd voted for it, but here's why I'm voting against it. They
Yeah.
did not do that.
No, they twitched.
They just
yelled.
said vote no, and everybody should vote no with us. That's not the same thing at all.
No. Right. Imagine yourself being approached by Ro Khanna with his position and Paul Gosar with his, and tell me which one you'd say. All right,
Chip Roy, really,
yeah.
because he was the most vocal
true.
one, said, not only should I
Yeah, but-
vote no, and I will vote no, but you all should vote no with me, and I'm even going to vote no on rule, because rule committee, the majority generally votes with the speaker. It's the speaker's committee, and I'm a definite no, and screw you.
It occurs to me, I don't even actually know how Paul Gosar voted. I'm just imagining having to talk to Paul Gosar, and that's enough for me to not want to do it.
Now, this is a different combo, but same lines here that I
Okay.
think gets to what's going on with Josh Hooter of Brookings and Liam Donovan, who's a Republican,
You should start a restaurant.
straight-talking operative.
Okay.
Josh says,
Josh
McCarthy
Hooters.
deserves credit for delivering the most Republican votes for a debt limit bill in about 10 years. But it's a little surprising Democrats aren't getting as much credit for, number one, bringing the bill to the floor, which is what they did by getting it through rules, as we just discussed, 53 votes, and delivering more votes despite greater concessions.
Yes.
Without Democratic votes, the Republican majority doesn't lift the debt ceiling even after the speaker delivers the best possible budget under the circumstances.
Yeah.
Liam says, well, it seems like they're getting plenty of credit. Our brains are just broken by zero-sum thinking, as if saying McCarthy did good means Biden or Jeffries didn't. Any deal between House Republicans and the Democratic White House was going to need and get bipartisan support. And Josh Hooter says, yeah, but the general framing is the deal nearly collapsed rather than Democrats pushed deal over the top. Near catastrophe sells better than bipartisan, just as McCarthy's skillful navigation sells better than Democrats do abnormal things for government to function. Now, the latter is important because that's what happened.
I like that one. Yeah. That's more interesting to me, but okay.
Yeah, and Liam Donovan says, yeah, but it didn't collapse. And Josh said, well, that's right, but that's how it's being portrayed by the press, and that's the point. The very basis of a leader's power is power influence over the agenda. It's been decades since a bipartisan vote brought a major bill to the floor. The breakdown of partisan agenda control is huge, even outside of political science classrooms, says Josh Hooter. And that's why he thought spending time on what we've been doing for the past week is important, because it changes the way the House functions if, in fact, stuff like that happens going further. And why wouldn't it? Because Kevin McCarthy is really weak, says me, not Josh. But that's why I think it's important, and I agree with him.
All right. I think I will too then.
Right? Well, Liam's skeptical.
like it.
Again, he's a Republican.
no,
I guess
yeah,
I'm going to need further evidence this is a fundamental change than a one-off. And Josh Hooter says, well, unfortunately, finding evidence McCarthy lacks floor control is difficult to observe because denying a vote means we never observe the vote.
That's
Just
true.
lack of action. You don't see it, It's what didn't happen, and you don't get to analyze what didn't happen because you don't know why it didn't happen. So there's some evidence of it in the general slow pace of the floor schedule, but that's pretty bad measure. But if there's a metric to follow, Josh says, that's really what you should follow. How much trouble is Kevin McCarthy now having in getting stuff to the floor? And along those lines, here's a piece from The Independent by Eric Garcia. The debt limit vote signals the beginning of the end for Kevin McCarthy. I think that's a little bit extreme. But the point he's trying to make, which I think are interesting ones, is illustrated, for example, on the one hand by Melanie Zanona, who's a CNN Capitol Hill reporter. Sarah Ferris from Politico said, Andy Biggs is not happy that the debt deal passed with more Democrats than Republicans.
Okay.
We were told
Why?
they'd never put a bill on the floor that would take more Democrats than Republicans to pass. We were told that.
Oh, in secret. Was
That's
it written?
what Andy Biggs says.
Yeah, sure, Andy. I mean, maybe.
Okay? And so Melanie Zanona
That's
asked
not
McCarthy about
crazy.
it and McCarthy said, I never remember that, promising that bills would pass with more Republicans than Democrats, and asked if it's a problem. He said no. He delivered 2/3 of his conference, and that's the end of it. Now, remember, the other day, Chip Roy was complaining in Rules Committee.
Yes.
And again, I'm so glad we went through all of this because now you can tie it together and see what's going on here.
Mm-hmm.
Chip Roy said in Rules Committee there was an unspoken agreement
Right.
that you needed to have a majority of Republicans and unanimity to pass anything out of rules.
I mean, so majority of support
Meaning,
among...
you not only need 7 of the 9 Republicans, you need 9 of the 9 Republicans.
Well, yeah, I think what he meant was that you need majority support among Republicans in the entirety of the
say
conference.
I'm present and I'm not voting. Then
Well,
it would be 7-0.
But I thought he meant majority support among the conference in general, but that you would also need unanimity among the Republicans on the
Well,
rules
because
committee.
as you point out, the committee is structured 9-4 Republican. Unanimity on Republicans automatically means you have a majority in the committee.
Yes, no, I just think he's talking about the majority of the conference plus unanimity in committee.
But
Unanimity
when asked,
in
McCarthy
committee.
says, I don't know what he's talking about, which
Oh,
is
well,
proper because
that's-
the way it was phrased is you don't know what he's talking about.
I mean, that's
My
true.
point
we
is-
don't even know what he's talking about.
The
And we know
people
what we're
among the
talking about.
71 who voted no keep saying McCarthy promised us stuff and he didn't deliver. He went back on his word. McCarthy's saying, I never made those promises. Now, one of two things is true. Either he did or he didn't.
Maybe more. Yeah,
You know? And it could be that he didn't, but those guys thought he did.
that could definitely be.
And it could be they're lying about it. But the point is, they're pissed off. And
That's
so that
true.
whole article about how this is trouble for McCarthy going down the road is part and parcel of what actually happened. And that's why it's so important that the New York Times actually covered this in a news analysis piece by Carl Hulse, who is not Peter Baker. McCarthy emerges from the debt limit fight with victories and wounds.
Yes.
Correct. That's what happened.
Okay. Good. I'm glad that got straightened out. But yeah, that's true. You can't tell what's happening with these people. They could think that McCarthy's a liar. McCarthy could think they're liars. It could just be misunderstandings on the part of both. It's entirely
bring the
possible.
popcorn. This is not good news for McCarthy. Not a big win for McCarthy.
McCain, though. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio, the only program that's still good news for John McCain. I guess. I don't know. We were making that joke on the way out. Yeah, this is a very interesting situation that the Republicans find themselves in. They've, some members, enough members of their conference have wanted this fight forever that no matter what happened, they were going to say that McCarthy promised something and didn't deliver because they want to have the fight over vacating the chair, even though we have no idea who they would want to put in the chair. They were so insistent on maintaining the right to move to vacate the chair that obviously, I don't know, that's on their minds and they want to do it. And no matter how McCarthy performed, someone was likely to say that he didn't deliver on his promises, and so therefore we will move to vacate the chair. It's just a question of how many Republicans agree and are aggrieved and never wanted McCarthy, and how many of those are able to tell that they won't win that motion and so therefore shouldn't bother or burn themselves.
The thing. You set it up so that, one person can offer a vacate the chair motion, but that doesn't mean you win it.
Right.
You don't win it with one vote. And who would run? Everybody who would run conceivably, Patrick McHenry, Scalise, Jordan. I mean, anybody whose name you recognize outside of Marjorie Taylor Greene is on McCarthy's side. And so is Marjorie Taylor Greene, for that matter.
Now we forget that she kind of has taken not a normal position, but a different weird one.
From the other House Freedom Caucus people.
Yeah.
So who would you run? Paul Gosar?
Yes.
Matt Gaetz? Chip Roy?
Chip Roy, sure. He would run. I mean, he's a frustrated leader wannabe as it is.
Ralph Norman?
I don't know.
I mean, the two guys who are on the Rules Committee who
Yeah.
voted no. They don't have
I know
anybody,
him.
so it's an empty threat. And, I think the country would be well served, and McCarthy would be well served by exposing that threat to be empty. If you have a toothless, fangless, threat, then make it so.
That might not be a bad idea. Instead of sitting around sweating the motion to vacate the chair, let him run one or two and lose, and then you walk around saying, they have that right to offer that motion. It's nothing. Don't worry about it.
Fine. Go ahead. Offer it.
Yeah, maybe you want to run through one or two in order to win them, just to show that it'll always happen. But yeah, it'll be very interesting to figure out who's telling the truth about what secret agreements existed and what they said. It's difficult to know whether aggrieved members of the rank and file in the Republican conference actually have an accurate picture of what was said and what was promised. It could be that neither side is actually lying about the content of the agreement, but that you're talking about two people with two different and sometimes viable interpretations of the same agreement.
But, it doesn't make for good relations. At the same time, it reminds me of the old movie MASH, at the end, where Major Houlihan is all upset about what's going on and yells at Colonel Blake, you have to fix this or I'll resign my commission, as if like that's the greatest thing in the world. And Blake just shrugs and says, so resign your damn commission.
Yeah, okay. I can see. But, yeah, this is... it'll be very interesting to see how this unwinds. And it doesn't really matter.
Turns out it was a meaningless fact. Blake didn't care.
Yeah. And, this will be interesting to see. If the angry, aggrieved Republicans remain angry and aggrieved but have no threat, if you make this stuff right or will move to vacate the chair, go ahead and move to vacate the chair. You don't have anything near the votes to do it. Although that would be funny for Democrats to come to the rescue there and say, vacate the chair.
Well, again, part
Maybe
of the
they
question
would.
also that
Why
we
not?
didn't discuss, but is certainly part of the mix and has been reported on, is what did Hakeem Jeffries get for support? He didn't just give them 53 votes in rules.
Okay.
He didn't just give them
On the roll, yeah.
171 or however many it was on the actual bill. He got something for it. What was it? We don't know.
Yeah. Although I thought I saw
People were
somebody
reporting on
hinting
it.
at
They
something.
said, he's going to get some consideration at a later date.
Okay, we don't know, but people were reporting on it anyway.
Yeah.
That's true. There were some attempts to work it out, but
common sense and Occam's razor says he got something.
Yeah. What was it that I saw hinted? I wish I had. I don't know why I didn't put that aside. Where did I see it? I'll have to search around.
You search around. Meanwhile, a tweeter named Brian Allen points out a Washington AP story. A Republican attempt to expand work requirements for federal food aid and debt legislation moving through Congress would increase federal spending by $2.1 billion over 10 years, far from the cuts GOP lawmakers had promised.
Oh, okay.
So, did they win? Did they lose? A compromise on the food aid requirements between House Republicans and President Joe Biden may have backfired for the Republicans, who won the new work requirements for some able-bodied recipients in exchange for Democratic demands to drop work requirements for some others who were more vulnerable, such as veterans and homeless people. But an estimate from the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office released late Tuesday said that while the new work requirements in SNAP would save money, the added benefits pushed by Democrats would cost more and add almost 80,000 people to the rolls in an average month.
Okay.
So that's a win for the Democrats. Of course, McCarthy said, well, those are wrong. And then he went ahead and said, I don't like the CBO estimates. That's a common thing that Republicans say. And then McCarthy went on to say words to the effect of, I think that we're spending too much on Medicare and Social Security. And you may remember Joe Biden's address to Congress, where he basically forced Kevin McCarthy to lock in on, we're not going to touch it, by embarrassing him. You're going to cut Medicaid and Social Security, and the Republicans said, no, 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 liar, liar, liar. And Biden smiled and said, okay, so you're not going to cut it. Thank you for admitting it in public. You're committed. It was a great move. No, nobody remembers that anymore, but it happened.
All right.
All right. So now McCarthy says, yeah, we're going to cut it, but this didn't work. We couldn't do it this way, so we're going to set up some sort of commission or something.
Okay.
And people, pointed to the speaker and said, there is a mechanism for doing this. It's called the Congressional Budget Office. Or if you wish, you could do it through Budget Committee.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, these things exist. It's not, I have to invent something because I'm not getting what I want. Well, what are you going to invent? Simpson Bowles?
Yeah, let's invent that. Super committee.
Right? Republicans are still claiming victory, says the AP, on the debt compromise after trying for several decades to expand work rules for food aid and other government assistance programs that were first put into place in 1996. But it's unclear if the new budget estimate might cost Republican votes. Well, we know what happened.
Okay.
71 Republicans voted against it. Now, Playbook is significant because, remember, Playbook gets most of their information as gossip from the McCarthy camp.
Yes.
So Playbook's headline today, how McCarthy and Biden both won the debt deal. It's just remarkable when they start giving Democrats credit.
Yeah.
Yes, more Democrats than Republicans ultimately voted for the bill. Yes, that's something of a disappointment for McCarthy. He guaranteed 150 votes. He delivered 149. But getting 2/3 of House Republicans to back any debt ceiling increase is a remarkable feat. And we know this because McCarthy himself said that. That's exactly what they print.
Okay. Yeah.
Right?
All
Now,
right.
here's another one that you could juggle and read differently. The hard right is brought to heel. Our colleagues Sarah Ferris and Olivia Beavers have some important insight on how Jim Jordan, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and Thomas Massie helped McCarthy quash a rebellion. And yet, even as there's lingering anger on the right, the rumblings of booting McCarthy have largely extinguished, at least for now.
Okay.
So is that evidence McCarthy is taming the right wing, or is that evidence McCarthy's weak and he's still beholden to him and still has to bend over backwards to do stuff? I mean, don't forget, Jim Jordan, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and Thomas Massie are not moderates.
Right. And so if it's either, so the question is, has he brought them into McCarthy? Has McCarthy brought Greene, Jordan, and Massie into the fold in some way? And if so, through what mechanism? Or are they saying, well, we'll do what you need now, but you'll owe us later?
Right. And then,
both.
Of course, a major
They both
victory
think
for
they have a
Biden.
deal.
They have to acknowledge that. On the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, there's not only signs of relief in the White House, there's a sense that Biden navigated dire legislative straits with finesse. Major victory for Biden, not just preventing an economic calamity, but proving 5 months into a divided government that the White House and the House Democrats have persevered through what seems at times like a rocky relationship. Fine.
Okay.
Oh, by the way, it doesn't mention it, but Hakeem Jeffries.
Okay.
Right. So that's how the official Washington press is handling it. And I think for the most part, that's fine. Again, the only person who's not getting enough credit is Hakeem Jeffries. Everybody else gets the credit they deserve. And McCarthy, it's interesting because it's complicated. There's nothing straightforward about Kevin McCarthy.
Right. Okay.
He's not that skilled, but he's skilled enough. He got the job done, which is an incredibly low bar, but he passed over that low bar. He pissed off his conference. What does that mean for later? We don't know. He got stuff done, but only with Democratic votes. What does that mean? We don't know. It's way more complicated than big victory for Kevin McCarthy, but it's not way more complicated to say big victory for Joe Biden. And that's my summary of what happened.
All right. I think it would also, likewise, you could easily fall into this mistake because it's a journalistic pattern. And you could say, Kevin McCarthy, a complicated figure. He's not. The situation was complicated. He didn't navigate it with any particular finesse. He was just there and didn't display any particular deal-making abilities or coalition-building abilities. Things fell into place. That's good. It may have been someone else's work. But yeah, that's true. There's also the hierarchy of how things are reported in Washington. The president, who may or may not have done any of the legislative maneuvering, gets a lion's share of the credit because he's the president, and it's
Yes.
the biggest beat there is. So
Right. After that, the speaker. And after that, you have to look up who the minority leader in the House is because, we don't talk about him.
that's the role. And as you said, it would have been played the same way by Nancy Pelosi. And so a job well done by Hakeem Jeffries. That was the role.
So the
and he
press
did
won't
it.
say it, but we thought we should. So
Good.
the next topic, which I'm going to cover, is sort of a combo of book banning and Ron DeSantis. Not that they could be separated.
Okay. Sure. What's he done?
This comes from both national and local in my area news. The national news, Greg Sargent and Paul Waldman report, in a deep red Florida county, a student-teacher revolt shames the right.
Florida
And they
County.
write, by now, it's obvious that the reactionary culture warriors who want to reshape American education are inspiring a serious liberal counter-mobilization in response. Remarkably, this backlash to the backlash is gaining momentum in some of the reddest parts of the country, and also the purple parts like where I live.
Okay. Well, can we guess what county in Florida? I don't know enough counties. Escambia.
Hernando.
Okay.
A raucous school board meeting in Hernando County, Florida on Tuesday night captured what's striking about this new phenomenon. The scene featured teachers pointedly declaring that right-wing attacks are driving them to quit, even as parents and students forcefully stood up on their behalf, demanding a halt to the hysteria. I've never seen such fear from my colleagues as I've seen in the last 2 months, social studies teacher Victoria Hunt told the board. The whole affair really put the culture war mongers to shame. Not that they'll see it that way. The meeting also showed, with maximum rage, fear, tension, suspicion, that's precisely the outcome they want. This county, north of Tampa, voted for Florida's Governor DeSantis in 2022 by a 41-point margin. It's where fifth grade teacher Jenna Barbie recently enraged local enforcers of right-wing orthodoxy by showing her class Strange World, a Disney movie with an openly gay character.
Oh, okay. That's all right.
Florida Department of Education is investigating whether she violated DeSantis's Don't Say Gay law, restricting classroom discussion. Barbie's resigning, but she's hardly the only one. At Tuesday's meeting, local teacher Daniel Scott gave a moving speech declaring the climate of rage is driving him out of the profession. And nearly 50 teachers are reportedly planning to resign in this school district.
In Hernando.
That's a lot.
Yeah, I bet.
So at the meeting, Shannon Rodriguez, a favorite of the right-wing Moms for Liberty that led the attack on the Disney movie, kept robotically repeating phrases like woke ideologies and woke agenda, not even slightly disturbed by any sense of obligation to define the meaning. She proudly brandished solidarity with boycotts of Bud Light. Another conservative parent practically shouted, "You've awakened the entire alpha male blood of this country."
Roar. She's not.
But the real story was the response. Again and again, parents and students forcefully defended teachers. They cast the right's attacks as the real threats. War on woke, one student said pointedly, more like war in your own children's future.
Okay.
It's me and my fellow students who are feeling the effects of this. A third said the removal of books in classrooms is what's really indoctrinating students, and things like this are happening all over. Liberal parents in states as far-flung as New York, North Carolina, and Montana are organizing local groups. Happened right here in Newtown, Connecticut, which is the next story.
All right.
Democratic politicians are stepping up. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker will soon sign a bill that requires schools and libraries to adopt a prohibition on book removals for political reasons. Otherwise, no state funding.
A
So it's
ban
doing
on
an
banning.
anti-DeSantis.
Okay.
Ban on banning.
Excellent.
We've also
What about
learned that
banning
9
bannings
Democratic
and
governors
bans?
representing nearly 9 million students have sent a letter to leading textbook companies decrying the negative impact that censorship and book banning has on this nation's students. Phil Murphy, governor of New Jersey and the head of the Democratic Governors Association, says these governors will be modeling an alternative to right-wing censorship going forward.
Good.
So just as a car wreck commands attention, that's why we were paying attention to Rules Committee.
Right.
The ugliness of right-wing culture warring often transfixes news media, but another story is beckoning. Ordinary parents everywhere and their elected representatives are responding and declaring they've had enough. Now, a couple of observations about this. Number one, it's nice that the Democratic governors would do this, but that's not how things work. And by that, I mean this.
What do you mean?
If your state is large and it has a state curriculum board or some body, which is an official state entity that determines what ought to get into the curriculum of your state's textbooks, that's a state that matters.
Okay.
Texas, California.
Mm-hmm.
If your state is the size of Rhode Island,
yes,
with all 30 students,
right,
it doesn't. And so Texas and California often dictate how textbooks are written.
What
and
if
it's
you're
complicated.
Students?
It's one thing to have Texas say we don't want that for our history books. But even for things like straight humanities, English, if you're going to pick an essay to illustrate early 20th century literature, the question isn't what essay you pick, it's what are you trying to illustrate?
Yes.
Are you trying to teach simile and metaphor? Are you trying to do this? You're trying to do that. Who's the author? What's the background about the author? And if you have a choice of 8 excellent essays, which one do you pick? It's not so simple.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what textbook writers and editors wrestle with when they try to produce a product that will not only sell in New York, but also in Texas and California, which has enormous markets for school textbooks.
Yeah.
So the governors can say what they want, but the market's really going to dictate what people buy.
Mm-hmm.
And that market's going to be influenced by state-level politics, and the larger states are going to have a big say, which is why Florida is, so important to have in this discussion. So that's one thing that I take away from this. The other thing that I take away from this is that this is happening in a lot of different places. As you know, because I told you, there was a discussion about banning 2 books in Newtown. One of them was a book called Flamer by Mike Curato, and I read the letter from Mike, defending his book.
Yeah.
The other was Blankets by Craig Thompson. And these books are in the Newtown High School library and available for checkout.
Mm-hmm.
Blankets is autobiographical. It's a story about an abused young man raised in an evangelical Christian family who experienced his first love. Flamer is a semi-autobiographical book, a story about a bullied Filipino teen who realizes he's gay. This comes from Hartford Current, who's covering what happened because in the past 48 hours, 2 Connecticut school board members in my town resigned amid the book banning controversy. Mm-hmm. They had a vote. There's 4 Republicans and 3 Democrats on the school board. But one of the Republicans was absent for family reasons.
Okay.
Right? It's known why. His wife died.
I mean, that's a family reason.
And so there's 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats. They voted on whether to ban these 2 books, and it was a 3-3 vote.
Okay.
It was a raucous meeting. There's been raucous Facebook pages. I don't see them because I'm not on Facebook. Mm-hmm. But both sides have taken to yelling at each other.
Both sides.
And in the last 48 hours, 2 members of the school board left in the middle of a controversy over the proposed banning or restriction of 2 coming-of-age novels in the high school library. They resigned. 2 Republicans resigned.
Oh, okay.
They're unhappy about how the town has been responding to us. People have been very mean.
Yeah, I'm not certain what's happening here. Okay.
So with that vote, Democratic Town Committee Chair Alex Villamil said the meeting and vote will go on as scheduled tonight, and it will be live streamed on YouTube with the 5 remaining members, which gives a Democratic 3-2 majority.
Okay.
So chances are the books won't be banned.
That's
as of tonight.
Good. I was getting worried about who's resigning here. Why would anybody
So 2
resign
Republicans resigned. They said people are being mean. And in Newtown, the Harvard Current writes, the controversy over the books reached a fever pitch on Tuesday when Newtown Allies for Change, which opposes the banning, posted on his Facebook page a list of the people who asked that the books be banned and named them. They got the list with the Freedom of Information Act from the school.
All right.
Turns out some of the people are
What's
Republican stalwarts on the Republican Town Committee and on the Republican committees around town. Yeah. 9 people asked for Flamer to be banned, and 1 person asked for Blankets to be banned. And, they were very upset that their names are out there, but it's freedom of information,
Yeah,
if
you're
entitled to know that.
Sure, absolutely.
And so what happens now? It's not really clear why those two Republican members resigned.
Yeah, I'm not sure
We
I
don't know.
understand. Okay.
They say it had nothing to do with this controversy, but we don't like the way that people have been acting.
All
That's a
right.
ridiculous statement.
I guess it is. I don't really understand. I mean, okay. I imagine.
We don't know, but they resigned, and that leaves a 3-2 Democratic majority in the
they
votes
must have
tonight.
known
That's the
that
facts that we know.
It must have known that it would leave a 3-2
Hello?
Democratic majority. So
This
wonder,
argument has been going on for 6 weeks
yeah.
in public.
I mean, so I'm guessing that they were against the ban and were tired of being threatened by pro-ban Republicans.
One of the
maybe?
pro-ban Republicans is the head of the Republican Town Committee. So there's obviously been a lot of Republican pressure on the school board people
Yeah.
to toe the Republican line. And that's part of this. And maybe they've just had enough of that. So I don't know.
I don't know what kind of pressure is being brought to bear. As, you know, in the absence of knowing what kind of pressure they're facing, I want to say, well, you have an obligation to stay there, occupy the seat, and don't let the pro-ban Republicans replace you. But I mean, if it's death threats, then it's hard to tell people that.
Well, they were
sit still
pro-ban
for
because
death
that's how they
sets.
voted. So I don't know what difference
They
it
were
makes in the
pro-ban?
end. But the fact of the matter is, the town needs to elect more Democrats because if you elect Republicans, stuff like this happens.
Yeah.
That's a pretty simple message. And you don't have to like a particular Democrat, but sometimes it's better to be a yellow dog Democrat and avoid this stuff.
Yeah.
Sorry, if somebody's really stupid or corrupt or bad, don't vote for them. But for the most part, you really want to avoid this. And this is what happens when you don't show up at low turnout elections, which is what happened last time.
Wow. Okay. I mean, that is a weird and complicated picture, and I guess.
But that's
you'll keep
happening
an
in
eye
every
on
town.
it.
So Greg Sargent's national story about Ron DeSantis.
Okay.
There are people who are organized. You know this, Loudoun County near you, and other places. This whole
All around me.
cathode ray tube stuff.
Mm-hmm.
There are people who are organized, but not necessarily a lot of them, but they're very loud and very well organized and very well funded who will come into your local school board and try to do this.
Yes.
And it takes organization to stop it, and it's going to be messy, and it's happening everywhere, and, there's no avoiding it. So every election counts, from dog catcher to local school board to president of the United States and everything in between.
Mm-hmm. And, your usual candidate in the box sort of figure. They figure out very quickly that they can find a lot of backup and support, and they gain local notoriety by mimicking these tactics in the local school board. But you should also know that you can also rise to prominence locally by being the person who organizes against it as well.
Yes.
So go ahead.
Do it right. Try to be respectful. Everybody knows each other here. Mm-hmm. Yes, they're strident. Try not to be too strident, but get it done.
Yeah, although if you tell me that the consequences of being too strident is that 2 Republicans quit, I don't know what to do now. That sounds good to me.
Yeah,
So, all right. Well, I'm glad it came out well, at least temporarily in your area. That's an interesting dynamics. Also difficult to interpret without knowing all the facts and
people are complicated.
What.
And so usually
like
things are not black and white. And here's yet another different example.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that is interesting. Lots happening in Florida. I have another Florida story set aside. Perhaps we can help set the table for what's happening in the state there too. Interesting fact I learned about Hernando County when I went to look up where it was exactly. That part wasn't interesting. You already told me that it was sort of central western Florida. But I did learn this when you were saying that it was a particularly conservative area. I guess the county seat is a town called Brooksville, or at least at some point was. At least I'm seeing this in the history section here. But Brooksville was had a different name at some point. The local residents of the county decided to name it Brooksville in honor of Preston Brooks. Preston Brooks, history buffs may remember, is the South Carolina representative who beat Charles Sumner with his cane over the slavery issue. They, in the situation came away with the idea, let's name it after the guy who beat the senator. So that's kind of a conservative area. You're right. Or at least it was in the 1850s.
Or at least they're pro-Kane.
Yes. I mean, that's pretty amazing. And trying to be like, saying, let's name our town after Jefferson Davis. Okay. That's actually a bad idea. But then they lost that war, but they kept the name. So, yeah. I mean, maybe they did. I didn't read past the history part.
Well, I think it's inappropriate to name him after Jefferson Davis. That guy lost. Let's name it after David Duke.
Yeah, right. He hasn't lost yet. All right. Well, that's an interesting situation. I will mention briefly that the story I put aside about Florida is about something probably a lot of people anticipated happening. The stories beginning to be generated of families leaving Florida because it's just not safe for their kids. In particular, of course, if you're raising any transgender kids, you're going to want to get out of there. But people have anticipated this for a long time, but it's now coming to fruition. It's not something that people are just chatting about or considering anymore. They're actually having to uproot and move, and they're finding that their friends, family, neighbors are doing the same. And it's not just Disney talking about moving their interests out of Florida. It's actual Floridians as well. So, all right, starting to happen in numbers. And we're getting near our break music, and today being Thursday, this is your sign-off for the week, Greg. We won't hear from you until Monday.
As they say on PBS, we'll just have to leave it there.
Yeah, there's no choice but to leave it there. But there are so many different ways to leave things there. And, all right, I think we covered things
ladies
thoroughly.
and gentlemen, this is why you pay attention to Rules Committee and these little procedural things that David and I go over. Sometimes it turns out they're indicative of a bigger thing.
Yeah, and sometimes it's just a huge waste of time. But other times it pays off.
Like that.
And that's fair. Okay, thanks, Greg. We'll see you again on Monday. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. And, there's a lot that's interesting in the history section of the Hernando County, Florida Wikipedia entry. It's very interesting how stridently pro-slavery the local population was in the 1850s. I don't know if they're still feeling that way. But, yeah, it's and by the way, there's a story of numbers even in the early days here. The early history of Hernando County begins this way. Roughly 100 settlers and over 50 slaves arrived in what would become Hernando County in February of 1842. So that was a pretty good ratio right there, and they probably could have turned things around if fighting were isolated to Hernando County, which it wasn't. But anyway, it goes on to point out that, the county is named for Hernando de Soto, the explorer, and there already is there's also a De Soto County in Florida, and I guess so they said, well, the other part of the name hasn't been used, we'll pick Hernando, which is sort of an interesting choice all by itself, as opposed to saying, but we'll find somebody else to name it after. But apparently at some point there was a movement on, or that it was in fact briefly renamed Benton County in 1844. Why? For Missouri Senator Thomas Hart Benton, a strong supporter of territorial expansion, who aided in the county's creation. However, Benton, it is said, fell out of favor with the county's residents later in the decade due to his decision to support the Missouri Compromise and the overall reversal of his stance on slavery, and so the county's name reverted in 1850 back to Hernando County. So if anybody changes their mind or says, maybe slavery isn't awesome after all, they said, to hell with that guy. And then, of course, if somebody else says, I never liked slavery, they would then consider naming their towns, their leading towns in the county seat, after the guy who said, oh, you don't like slavery? I will beat you with my cane. That is a conservative area. But as I said, this is happening all over Florida. People are reconsidering, even conservative-leaning people considering relocating or standing up and fighting, like the teachers in Hernando County. I really appreciate that they would do that. The article I made mention of is in Florida Today. Let's see. I want to bring it up and give you some taste of some of the examples. We might be better served by having you guys browse and read through the article on your own, but to give you an idea of what they're talking about, just, I don't think it's not happening in politically significant numbers in terms of like changing the face of the vote there. If anything, it's people who would have, had they stayed, voted against the DeSantis machine, if there even is one. Or, maybe DeSantis himself is the machine. I don't know. He's a robot. We've discovered that much. But for them to leave, of course, it doesn't help build power for the opposition, but it kind of, I don't know. It may just turn a conservative state more conservative, possibly. But, I don't know. It does tell a different story about what's going on in Florida. Brevard County families, I guess, leaving Florida. Like, this must be, is it the home base of whatever Florida Today represents here? I'm not really sure. But anyway, Brevard families leaving Florida. Why they say the Sunshine State no longer feels like home, writes Britt Kennerly. So it's a current article. Let's see what how the story is set up here. Eli Logan, unless it's Ellie Logan, I don't know. E-L-I, I've seen both pronunciations, lived the first 46 years of her life in native Florida. I imagine an Ellie is maybe the pronunciation, not Eli. Okay, so Ellie Logan lived her first 46 years in her native Florida. She probably, she said, would have stayed 46 more, but between the state's politics pushing hard to the right and a slew of new laws affecting Florida's LGBTQ plus community, schools, and more, she's joined the ranks of those leaving Florida for places they find safer for themselves and their families. Logan, her husband, and their 3 daughters recently left Brevard for an area of Georgia that's a splash of political blue in northeast of Atlanta. Okay, interesting. It's a place this nurse practitioner sees as a better, healthier place to raise the couple's children, the oldest of whom identifies as gay. She's not alone. When Logan announced her family's move on Facebook, well wishes were punctuated with messages like, "We can't stay either. It's not safe, and it's not headed in a healthy direction." Over the past few weeks, other goodbyes have popped up across social media, like that of Stacy and Sanjay Patel, staples of the Brevard County Democratic Party for years, and Wendy Johnson, who explained in an impassioned Facebook post why she, her husband, and their daughter would soon be moving to New York. Very interesting, all by itself. Let's see. We'll skip down. Oh, here we go. Continuing on. It's not like people aren't moving to Florida. They are. According to census figures, a net total of about 320,000 made the move to Florida between 2021 and 2022. And of course, Ron DeSantis, to the extent that he pays any attention to this story at all, will say yes. The much stronger indicator is the thousands of people moving to Florida for freedom or whatever they're doing. It's mostly for weather. But, okay. And by the way, weather will eventually make you want to move out of Florida as well. And if you're moving there for the jobs, that too, it'll eventually make you want to move out of Florida, unless your job is, like marine salvage at some point, then you'll become very busy. But if it's construction, there'll be just less and less land to build on, and you'll have to move elsewhere. Anyway, so yes, 320,000 people moved to Florida, making it the most moved to state in the country, a place where people flock for warmer weather, lower taxes, and likely in some cases politics to their liking. Can't really tell how many people are moving there for the politics, but it's got to be some, right? The departure of Florida residents, though, not for a better job or to be closer to family or for improved living conditions, but because they say they no longer feel welcome. It's different, and it's to the bone personal for everyone who makes that decision. Some say the exodus of those feeling disenchanted and disenfranchised has only just started. Even former Florida Representative David Jolly, a Republican, said he considered leaving the state where he was born and raised, citing DeSantis' attacks on migrants, the LGBTQ community, and African Americans. Why would I want to raise my kids in an environment in which they're shamed for embracing diversity of thought and diverse cultures? Jolly said in a May 21st interview on MSNBC. And it's a good question. It's easier for some financially to pick up and go, especially those who have jobs waiting or enough resources to get reestablished in a new location. But no matter the circumstances, leaving is draining emotionally and physically, say 3 Space Coast families who've made that choice. First up, the Logan family. And then up the Patels, formerly of Satellite Beach, and their 2-year-old daughter, and the Johnson Chunka family of Melbourne Beach, Wendy Johnson and Peter Chunka, or Chunka, I don't know how he pronounces that U there, and their daughter, Jenny. These are mere snapshots of their stories, but they have a common thread. Family comes first, and these people from a mix of political backgrounds no longer see their families as welcome and able to thrive in the Sunshine State. I'm particularly thinking here of, I don't know how I'm not getting in anybody's way. You make your own decision about how you want to handle things for your family, but it's sad to see. In particular, I just call out the Patel family here because they were active in local Democratic politics, and at some level you wish they'd stay and fight, but at the same time, they probably also have a pretty clear view of the writing on the wall there, and it's nobody can tell them it's their personal responsibility to stay and fight. They stayed and they fought for a long time, and now they have a young daughter, and that has to come first. And take a back seat to the political fighting that they were willing to do perhaps before they had young kids. And maybe they want to stay and fight because they have young kids, or maybe they want to establish themselves elsewhere. It sounds like if they are moving, I don't know, was it them that was moving to Florida or to Georgia? They may have a fight on their hands in Georgia as well, but maybe it's more winnable. Anyway, let's see. Shall we read a couple of examples? Well, we'll read a little bit about the Patel family. Stacy and Sanjay were very busy and very high profile in their life in Brevard County. They were 40-something activists, professionals with good educations. He, a graduate of UCLA, she of Carnegie Mellon. He's a former Democratic state committee man who ran unsuccessfully in 2018 against incumbent U.S. Representative Bill Posey for Florida's 8th congressional district, taking 40% of the vote. He tried for office again in 2020, running against John Tobiah, I don't know which, but for a county commission seat, and again lost. She, a Satellite High grad with family ties to the Space Coast, was at one time the chair of the Brevard Democratic Executive Committee. In the early days of COVID-19, she founded Mutual Aid Brevard to help people find the resources and information they needed. By May of 2023, the group had blossomed into an 18,000 plus members, encouraged to share what you have, ask for what you need. We're all in this together. Sounds pretty good. Job well done there. But the Patels were often vilified, facing attacks by local elected officials again and again. A commissioner suggested my children should be aborted, which is amazing because, of course, they're anti-abortion. But they're pro-abortion when it comes to people they really, really hate because they're actually not pro-life, they're pro-death. But you knew that already. A state representative called me and my husband human feces, Stacy Patel recalled in a farewell message on Facebook before her family departed Florida in early May. I can't blame you there. So many factors played into their decision to move. Okay, they're not the ones moving to Georgia. They're moving all the way up to Pennsylvania, Swarthmore, Pennsylvania. As a matter of fact, from a desire to be a part of a progressive community to new local and state laws affecting everything from passing food or money out of a car window to the homeless, to abortion, to teaching history and the rights of LGBTQ people, all the things that are, of course, under attack, and the weird laws and vengeance that people are trying to exact down in Florida. I'm going to say gay. I'm going to protest, that farewell message stated. And then most of all, there's Emma, the daughter, The couple wants to raise her in a place where they feel a sense of belonging and hope. Who can blame them for that? Stacey Patel said in a recent phone call with Florida Today, "I believe politically that if Sanjay and I did not have a child, we'd stay there and fight," she said. There's the answer to that question. "But in my humble opinion, it's not a healthy environment to raise a child in." Just weeks in, she already sees a difference, Patel said. There's trees. That's different too, right? There's progressivism in this particular community and thoughtfulness. "I didn't know my neighbors before," she said. "Already, both neighbors have come over and said hi, and we've had conversations in the front yard. There's just an understanding that this is a community and not an assemblage of individuals. And diversity, all different kinds of people, young people, old people, black people, white people, Asian people. It's like breathing, you know, after holding your breath for a really long time." Well, that's quite a story, and there's others quite like it, and many of them are illustrated here, and it's very interesting and important to read. You should take some time to read through it, learn the stories, but we'll move on to a couple of other ones. But it's a small number of people, but I think somewhat politically significant. You should just know, of course, that there are such people in Florida. Not everybody who was in Florida is going to be a DeSantis supporter. It was a relatively close election the first time around. And just a reminder of who gets left behind when red states are abandoned and what people then have to do in order to live and find a place to raise their kids. And that's only the people who have the resources to do it. Those who have no choice but to stay and fight, some of them may stay and keep their heads down, but those who do stay and fight need our support to be able to do so too. I just wanted to kind of remind you of that. All right. I thought an interesting story. Other things that are happening, some of which are happening in Florida, some of which only have Florida passing through the story. There's a couple of them. One is the story of George Santos, who has some Florida connections, but is now mostly associated with New York, if not Brazil. And there's a small bore story that just sort of should get on the radar. I thought this was kind of interesting, and it's not entirely clear who knows what the hell's going on in the story. AP is reporting this one. Jake Offenhartz is the reporter, and the unsurprising headline, "Aide fired by George Santos says he got his job after sending money to Republican's deputy." That is to say, the Republican being George Santos. His deputy was getting paid off by a job seeker, and guess what? It resulted in getting the job. But you know what? It's actually maybe a more complex story than all of that. And we'll have to see. Greg is alerting me to a jury verdict coming in. Where? In what? I don't even know. This too. I guess, are we back down in Florida again? Jurors begin deliberations in Miami Commissioner Joe Carollo's federal civil trial, which I don't even think we had noted was going on. But when not only did they start deliberations, I think they ended deliberations. But it's a Florida story. So I guess before we continue and head over to something that will eventually land in court because it involves George Santos, we'll talk about what's happening in court just to update you. I guess it's a big enough story to make all the breaking news. The protracted federal civil trial of Miami City Commissioner Joe Carollo, I don't know, actually is coming to an end. And in fact, it ended. After 2 months of labored arguments, witness testimony, and numerous delays in federal court, attorneys for Carollo and the plaintiffs, Little Havana business owners William Fuller and Martin Pinilla, perhaps, delivered their closing arguments on Wednesday. Jurors did not reach a verdict late Wednesday and will resume deliberations Thursday. And the news from Greg was that they had, in fact, reached a verdict. Let's see. Jury just reached a verdict. We don't know what it is yet. Jurors were instructed to decide on the following. Did Fuller and Pinilla engage in First Amendment protected speech by supporting Carollo's political opponent, Alfonso Leon? Did Carollo retaliate against them by using city government offices beyond his regular duties because of their speech? And did he act with malice or reckless indifference to the plaintiff's rights? Okay. The jury has reached a verdict in this trial, currently waiting for the court to reconvene in a few minutes. Carollo himself is not there. His attorneys said, and he was 20 minutes away, but the judge said he'd only wait 10 minutes. So I don't know. I guess we'll go and see what happens, but I don't know anything about this trial, actually, but apparently it's big enough news that when it breaks, people start writing articles about it. That's interesting. Now, let's see. According to the plaintiff's attorney, Courtney Caprio's closing arguments, that's the attorney, the answer to those questions are an unequivocal yes. Caprio compared Carollo to a tyrant who disregards the guardrails of constitutional rights. Joe Carollo smashed through those guardrails to impose his own whims on Bill Fuller and Martin Pena, Caprio said during a 90-minute long closing speech. Okay, well, we'll have to catch up on that and see what's going on. Greg offers us another article on what's happening here. Federal civil trial opens from back on April 10th. The trial opens on Carollo, who's accused of harassment, and a further note in their lawsuit, originally filed in 2018, these two businessmen accused the powerful Miami politician of what stripe, I do not know, of using the city's code enforcement department along with its police and fire departments to retaliate against their bar and restaurant business by shutting down events and slapping them with code violations. They allege the actions cost them nearly $28 million in profits. Okay, well, as we await that jury verdict, I don't know why we jumped to this. I don't believe we've ever discussed this before, but I guess because it involves a trial of a local elected official, it makes for political news. But I am totally unfamiliar with that trial. And so I'll tell you what, I'm going to set that aside for now, because why introduce this story to you at the last act as breaking news when I think we can safely discuss it later on when we have a jury verdict. The fact that there's a jury verdict coming, well, I don't know. I guess it would have been interesting news had we ever discussed the trial before. But since I don't recall ever discussing it, I don't know. I'm happy to wait for the verdict and then let you know. Now, I probably would have skipped the story entirely, but now I feel like I have to let you know because, I don't know, I took the bait and we interrupted the flow of the show to tell you that there was a verdict, except I don't know what it is. Also, I don't know who the hell that is and what the hell they did. So, all right. Now we'll find out. Now your curiosity is piqued. But in the meantime, I'll tell you about the aide to George Santos, who says he got his job after sending money to Santos's political deputy. Here's what happened, and here's why it's weird and complicated. At first, I just thought, oh, well, he paid off the guy's chief of staff in exchange for a job. Straightforward story, right? A man who briefly worked as an aide to U.S. Representative George Santos says he got his job after sending a series of payments to one of the Republicans' top deputies. Derek Myers, 31, told staff of the House's Ethics Subcommittee during an interview on Wednesday that while he was trying to get a job in Santos's congressional office in late January, I guess before everyone knew exactly how disgusting he was, although late January, I think we had a pretty good inkling at that point. So what kind of a jerk tries to go to work for George Santos by that point? The answer is Derek Myers. And why? What happened here? He sent at least 7 $150 payments to Santos's director of operations, Vish Bura. And, okay, that's a weird, amount of money. 7 payments of $150. That's not the sort of money that you're used to talking about when it comes to bribery, but it's, just over $1,000. But normally we tend to hear about bigger numbers when it's just straight up pay for play. So right away I was kind of like, that's a weird amount of money. But we're talking about a brand new congressman's chief of staff maybe, or, one of his top deputies. But it's a new congressman who's going to be of limited value because he's already identified as a serious ethics problem and maybe on his way straight out the door. So maybe that accounts for the low dollars. Now, here's the deal. This is what made it even weirder. Myers shared details about the payments, including receipts and text messages with the Associated Press. And I mean, receipts? What kind of person has receipts for their bribes? Is it just, did he Venmo him the money and so therefore there are receipts, or what? What's happening here? Well, his account of how Burra helped him get hired hasn't previously been reported and raises questions about potential ethical improprieties around Santos. Yeah, of course. Myers said he began sending the money unsolicited. That's weird. Because he believed Burra, a right-wing political operative, wasn't getting paid by the House at the time and couldn't afford food. But he said he also hoped the payments might help him secure a job. So there's definitely some element of that in there. I guess if you're thinking, okay, so late January, maybe he hasn't been officially hired, and the House doesn't, the House employees get paid once a month, I believe. And so it could be that at that point you really are having difficulty making ends meet. But, eventually it's supposed to come around and help you meet your expenses. But that's interesting. So a guy who was a right-wing political operative, not, he believed, getting paid at the House and was having difficulty making ends meet. So you start sending him $150 at a time. I mean, it's just a weird arrangement to start with, but is it even possible that there was something other than bribing the guy to get a job that was originally on his mind? Or that it was concurrently on his mind along with, well, if I help him, he'll help me. It may not be a straight up, if you pay me, I will give you the job kind of a situation. But it's not a great situation regardless. And, going through a tough month or two is the price of working on Capitol Hill. You're trading money and stability, financial stability, away for power. If you try to make up that difference by simply taking bribes so that you have both money and power, then you're in trouble. Burra was a powerful person, Myers told the AP. I wanted him to advocate on my behalf. Burra, a reliable presence besides Santos, who helped escort his boss away from journalists after his arraignment in federal court last month, declined to comment. House investigators questioned Myers about the payments, documented in receipts and text messages, as part of a probe into workplace sexual harassment allegations that Myers made after being dismissed from Santos's staff in February. How do you like that? Bribe your way into the job with a guy who's a known problem, of course, and then you arrive there only to be sexually harassed when you arrive, although it's not clear yet in the story who's sexually harassing him. But I mean, does anybody want to guess? I mean, maybe it's the boss, right? All right. So that's interesting. Myers, a former journalist, received a job offer to be a legislative assistant in late January, but lasted less than a week in the position. At the time, Santos told Myers he was concerned by the findings of a background check, which showed Myers had been charged with wiretapping in Ohio after publishing a recording of a trial. I was wondering what sort of journalist decides to, leave that profession. I mean, lots of journalists will decide to leave that profession, but to do so by, in this manner. Let me pay the deputy of a member of Congress in order to get this job, but maybe that wasn't the reason he was paying. It's very complicated. And then, maybe we'll find out more. Maybe it'll make more sense if we knew who was he working for as a journalist. Like if it was the Daily Caller or something, okay, I get it. But now, he's been dismissed because of the findings of a background check, which shows that he's been charged with wiretapping in Ohio. Maybe he was working for James O'Keefe, who's constantly wiretapping people. I don't know. Now it's getting weird and complicated. In a February letter sent to the House Ethics Committee, Myers said he was ousted after he spurned Santos's sexual advances. That was quick. Accusing the congressman of running his hand along his inner leg and touching his groin while they were alone in the office. Wow, everything you really don't want, but everything you would think that Santos would let a week pass before you start sexually harassing the guy. He's brand new and you don't really know whether he's going to put up with this thing. But I guess Santos is just that kind of guy. Or the guy's lying. There's always that as well. Santos, of course, has denied the allegation, describing it as comical. That it is not. The House Ethics Committee is investigating several allegations of improper behavior by Santos, as you know, who has admitted to fabricating much of his biography and is currently facing federal charges that include fraud and money laundering. So why not throw some sexual harassment in there just to round him out as a human being? We'll be right back. Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I guess we'll continue with the AP story about the Santos thing. I didn't know it was going to become this complicated, but he's a weirdo, and weirdness follows him wherever he goes, and so do weird people, and they tend to have complicated stories. Let's see. Last month, Republicans in the House sidestepped a vote to expel Santos, referring the matter to the ethics panel. And then when they talked to the ethics panel, it turns out that they had to interview people who said they bribed their way into their jobs and were sexually harassed. How odd is that? The committee has not divulged whom it is interviewing or when a decision might be reached. I mean, that's funny because normally I think the Republicans probably were hoping to refer the expulsion motion to the ethics committee where it would die. But the ethics committee, I guess, took it seriously enough that they said, well, let's do a little bit of a hearing and an investigation. And then people started coming out of the woodwork, I guess, and saying, by the way, he was sexually harassing me and I bribed my way into some jobs there. And that's not the way to make things go away. So, I don't know, foolish of them, I guess, to have said, yeah, let's actually investigate it. Maybe you should not have done that if you wanted it to go away, which is not a great lesson because then, of course, they would just bury things rather than actually hold people accountable, which is, you know, what you would prefer that they really do with their time. Anyway, on Wednesday, members of the committee spent 2 hours questioning Myers about his sexual harassment allegations, his relationship with Burra, and whether he'd witnessed any illegal behavior during his short stint in the office. Yeah, he was illegally behaving on my leg and groin. I mean, sure, I witnessed illegal behavior. Oh, you mean other illegal behavior? Okay. Which is also an interesting question. I'm curious who asked that one. So, did you see anything else illegal there? Because, I mean, you just throw out the open question. See any illegal behavior lately in that office? Because there's a 50-50 chance the answer is yes. The behavior besides the one you're alleging. Anyway, he described finding Burra online, then pushing for a job at Santos's office out of an earnest desire to help the scandal-scarred representative. So he already knew him to be scandal-scarred, of course, and he figured I can come in and help. Why you would want to help that particular scandal-scarred representative, that's a real question mark about your, honestly, do a background check on anybody who wants to help George Santos. Myers also provided documentation, including emails and text messages with staffers and receipts showing his Venmo, ding, we got it right, payments to Burra. Stop doing your bribery over Venmo. In his interview, Myers said Burra didn't ask him for money, that's something, but once requested that he, quote, send more pizza, which he took to be a reference to the pizza emoji they'd previously used in Venmo subject lines. Oh, okay. That's interesting. So that's interesting. Is it cover? Is it mobster speak? Like, can I send you some cash? Don't send me cash. Send me pizza. Wink, wink. Which, by the way, was once all you needed to launch a conspiracy theory against Democrats. Pizza? Do you mean Comet Pizza? Does that mean you're a pedophile and you have dungeons underneath in the non-existent catacombs beneath Comet Pizza? Yada yada. Polenta is really yeah. You get the idea. But it is probably some of it. On the one hand, when you're talking about $150 payments to somebody who you think might not be getting paid by the house yet and you literally didn't want them to starve, was it really just I'm sending you money for pizza? Or was it wink, wink, pizza, stop saying you're bribing me, we're using Venmo, they keep records? I don't know. The House investigators asked Myers about a text exchange he had with Burra on January 29th, days after he'd been offered the job. Okay. In that exchange, Myers told Burra, did you get payroll yet? And the answer was no, you didn't have to do that, man, Burra replied, adding later, I'm going to pay you back for sure. All right. I mean, could be he's a liar, but all right. Myers acknowledged during his interview with the House investigators that he had secretly recorded at least one conversation with Santos and later shared it with a journalist. Where did this guy work? I'm curious about his background as a journalist because this would be the second accusation that he was illegally taping things. But journalists tape things all the time, so this is a little weird. He also said he had gone to the FBI while still working for Santos. And remember, he only lasted a week there. Can you imagine? I mean, on the one hand, I don't know what to make of the story of him sending money, and maybe he really did want to help the guy just, eat while he was waiting for payroll. Like that one line about, did you get payroll yet? No, you didn't have to do that, man. I'm going to pay you back for sure. It makes me think, okay, it was a poorly executed idea, but maybe it really was just, you need to eat. We had a good interview. I'm trying to get hired. Yes. Maybe it doesn't make any real ethical sense and there's no ethical way for us to handle this. You're just going to have to hang on and starve until you get payroll. But I decided to do this anyway because to hell with the red tape. I just wanted to have one human being helping another, even if we're all horrible human beings. Maybe. But then again, is it wink, wink pizza or is it real pizza that he's buying for him? It's a coin toss. But then when you get to the story of like, I don't know, is it just too crazy to believe that he wasn't really just trying to bribe his way into the job? Maybe. And then you realize he got the job. He's there for a week. He's sexually harassed. He has to go to the FBI in his first week of employment. He's sexually harassed. He's talking to the FBI. He's secretly recording things. There's no way. I mean, you'd think it would take you at least a week normally, I think a normal person, before they decide, I really have to do something about this, right? The guy's feeling me up. I got to record things, etc. To me, it feels like you wrestle with that for about a week and then you go, all right, something has to be done. But him inside of that first week, he's got it all ready. Like he's used to this happening to him wherever he goes. That's kind of weird. All right. So he had gone to the FBI while still working for Santos with the intention of possibly working as a confidential informant for law enforcement. I don't know, man. He said he decided to speak out about the harassment incident after he was forced to leave the job. And remember that happened inside of a week. There's some things we don't know about, still happening here. And we're going to have to see how this story develops. Originally, I thought it was going to be a frivolous little story that wasn't going to stay in the news for very long. And it may not. You never know. But it's starting to sound like this could become something more major at some point, and you'll hear more and more about it. And then I'll feel better about having wasted time on it. Okay, more substantive things. Yesterday, I got the note from Patrick Snyder via the Bird site that he had an, as he said, incisive thread defending the national debt and demolishing the debt limit statute, and I didn't get a chance to share it with you before the House had its vote. But remember, this is an ongoing issue. The Senate still has to act, and so why not share that thread with you? It comes from Bruce Bartlett, former columnist with the New York Times and writer in Forbes as well, etc., and a well-known personality on Twitter and elsewhere, who says, practically everyone on both the right and left err in their worldview of the national debt. How so? They all view it as a burden. In an ideal world, both sides believe we'd pay it off and be done with it. Is that what people think? I mean, that's people who, I guess, view the national debt as a kitchen table type issue. Debt. You take care of it. You pay it off. That's a thing that you do. Is that the case macroeconomically with a national debt, with a nation that has its own fiat currency? I'm starting to think that those things might mitigate our view of the debt. That might be where he's going. While this may be true for other countries, it is not true of the United States, Bartlett says. As Alexander Hamilton understood, founders, there is a huge demand for an asset with no risk of default. This is interesting. I'm seeing where he's going here. It mobilizes saving and gives the issuer a huge privilege in borrowing internationally at the lowest possible rate. It's a privilege that other nations resent but cannot compete with. One unappreciated aspect of the market for U.S. Treasury securities is precisely its size. It is very valuable for traders to know that maybe he means even, the largest trades won't materially affect the price, and that it is always highly liquid. This is not true of the stock market. So in other words, U.S. federal debt in the form of treasury bills and bonds, etc., you can purchase federal debt and use it as an investment instrument. It's not super lucrative, but it is 100% stable and will grow in value and will pay you interest, and they'll always pay it because the U.S. never defaults. Wink, wink. That's kind of an interesting way of looking at things. Large traders can affect the price of individual stocks. This is actually a huge problem for those with large holdings. It's often hard for them to diversify to minimize their risk. Also, the treasury market exists along a full spectrum of the yield curve, getting beyond me here. This is why treasuries, that is the bonds and treasury instruments, are used to price almost all other securities. The typical new mortgage is the 10-year treasury bond plus X number of basis points, because the typical mortgage only lasts 10 years before being paid off via home sale or refinance. The burden of the national debt is greatly minimized by the popularity of treasury securities. The Fed owns a vast amount of them, as do foreign central banks. Effectively, they have been removed from the market forever and don't compete with private borrowers. Anyway, the point Bruce Bartlett, I'm trying to make is that the treasury bond market is so incredibly valuable that it would be monumentally foolish to risk upsetting it by toying with default, as many Republicans are wont to do. I guess he's also arguing it would be monumentally foolish to try to eliminate it by actually paying off the debt. Right? One reason we know this is because there was a brief default, did you know that, in 1979, when the Treasury computers broke down. Even 10 years later, economists saw interest rates as 60 basis points higher because of this event. That's huge. 100 basis points, by the way, are 1 percentage point. So 60 makes it sound like there's something big going on here. It's small, relatively speaking, but higher than it should have been. A default resulting from Republican stupidity would be far, far worse today. Interest rates on Treasury securities would be elevated forever, costing taxpayers tens of billions of dollars per year in higher interest costs forever. And that's if there wasn't a total meltdown of the world financial situation. In a sane world, the debt limit wouldn't exist. In a sane world, the White House, Treasury, and DOJ would have long ago concluded that it is blatantly unconstitutional for many reasons far beyond the 14th Amendment. I curse past presidents with large congressional majorities for not just repealing it when they could, but they all liked the fig leaf it provided of limiting the debt, or at least feared the repercussions of abolishing it. As all economists know, I'll ask one, I'll find out, the debt limit does not limit the debt in any way. For one thing, the debt limit is violated whenever Congress passes a law that would cause the debt to exceed the limit. When the spending must be financed, it's like paying your credit card bill. Paying the bill isn't consumption spending. When the card was used, that was the spending. The inability of stupid Republicans to understand this simple fact should totally disqualify them from being taken seriously by the media or anyone in the media, but they still do. And that's true. And by the way, good parallel there, right? Like somehow the media sometimes gets convinced by right-wing ideologues on, say, the gun issue. Oh, you said clip rather than magazine. You're now no longer qualified to discuss this issue. And sometimes people actually believe it. That's an argument that sometimes works with people. And yet people confuse the federal deficit with the federal debt, or they think of the federal debt in microeconomic terms as something that ought to be paid off when it really isn't, or they actually don't understand the difference between paying off previously accrued debt and new spending, as Bartlett ends his rant with here. And if you can't understand that, and you're also the sort of person who thinks that making the mistake between magazine and clip is disqualifying on the gun issue, then this would certainly be disqualifying on the economics issue in general, or at least specifically on the federal debt, but apparently it never works that way. Okay, very interesting, and good point made there, and the ability to maintain a federal debt. Even if you were able to pay off all of the federal debt, there'd be good economic reasons for maintaining a federal debt anyway. Just simply to have out there a readily available, totally stable, and reliable investment instrument in Treasury bonds and Treasury debt. Okay, so that's worth thinking about as well. Other things to put on the record here. All right, let's see. I did find what I think was the article that I thought I had put aside, and I guess then I thought I didn't, but I did put it aside. Remember that I thought I had put aside someone's reporting on the idea that there was, in fact, some sort of deal struck between Jeffries and McCarthy in exchange for Democratic help in getting this bill across the finish line. The reason I couldn't find it was because the article that I put aside was actually one that said that there was no such deal. And I was looking for one that said that there was a deal. And the idea or the reporting that there wasn't, maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong. But at any rate, the context being the idea of a deal, we can at least offer this from Axios. Andrew Solander, who else is getting credit on this one? Julie Grace Brufke. I hope I pronounced that last name near correct, but maybe not. Brufke. Jeffries McCarthy offices say there was no deal to save the debt ceiling bill. That's of interest, whether it's true or not. It's interesting that it would be said. Editor's note right up at the top here. This story has been updated to include denials by McCarthy and Jeffries' office of any deal in exchange for Democratic support for the procedural vote. There are good political reasons to believe that they would want to deny such a deal, whether or not it exists, and that's sort of going to have to be baked into the background here as we read through this. Spokespeople for House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries disputed 4 Democratic sources who told Axios the two leaders had cut a deal for Democrats to help advance the debt ceiling bill to a final vote. Why it matters? Because we want to know what the F happened in all of this. But they say why it matters is that the 52 Democratic votes on a measure to bring the debt ceiling bill to the floor were necessary for the bill's survival after 29 Republicans voted against moving it forward Wednesday afternoon. That would be the rule vote. I guess the bill was eventually approved on a 314 to 117 vote. What we're hearing, 4 Democratic lawmakers said they had been told of a deal, with 2 saying they believed it involved boosting federal funding for projects in Democrats' districts, known as earmarks or community project funding. That would be in exchange for help with Democrats voting to advance the bill. What they're saying, McCarthy had told reporters after the initial afternoon vote that he had not cut a deal to ensure the Democratic votes. A spokesperson later told Axios that there was absolutely no deal and that suggestions to the contrary by Democratic lawmakers were, quote, not accurate. Jeffries' office also denied there was a deal. There was no side deal. House Democrats simply did the right thing and made sure the procedural vote passed because failure was not an option, spokesperson Christy Stevenson told Axios. Earlier, when reporters had asked Jeffries whether there had been a deal, the minority leader said, House Democrats to the rescue to avoid a dangerous default and help House Republicans get legislation over the finish line that they negotiated themselves. Okay. The context? The GOP resistance in the procedural rules vote was an unusual breach of norms. Typically, the majority party alone is considered responsible for putting a bill on the House floor on those votes. If Democrats hadn't stepped in, the push for a final vote to move forward toward avoiding a catastrophic default by the U.S. government would have ground to a halt. Well, it would have been a question mark as to where they go next. But if you defeat the rule for a bill, you do have the opportunity to try to write a different rule for the bill. But it takes some time, and ordinarily you would have to wait a day and you'd have to waive that in the rule, and that's difficult to do, especially when things are complicated and fault lines are appearing everywhere. Some new ones that you can't read just yet. You know, the safest thing to do is to go ahead and put the thing on the floor if the bill itself is not disastrous. So what else have we got here? The backdrop. Representative Rosa DeLauro, ranking member of the Appropriations Committee, previously had told Democrats that they would receive significantly reduced funding for community projects in their districts this year, according to Politico. And that would tend to argue maybe in favor of the interpretation that there was a deal, like, hey, bad news, everybody, you're going to get significantly less in earmarks, which you probably should have anticipated both in a Republican House and in a MAGA environment where it's considered not only well within bounds, but desirable to exact revenge on political enemies. And that's what MAGA Republicans would consider Democrats to be, political enemies. That instead of, well, we'll have some Republican policy victory, but mostly the money, is in a go along to get along situation, the usual default mode. Most things will operate as usual, but will win Republican policy victories. MAGA Republicans demand revenge against Democrats as well. Why should we be funding anything in any Democratic district? So, you probably should have anticipated some lower funding. And if there was a deal in the offing, you could see where that story would develop, right? We're bailing them out in a very unusual situation. There must be something that was gotten. Even Greg sort of hinted at the idea of, well, he didn't do it for nothing. But right now, the story from Jeffries' office is, we did it for nothing, which, that that might be what you have to say. That might be part of the deal as well. Let's say that you did it for nothing, so that everybody stops covering the story, and then we can quietly do that thing that we actually have a deal for. But who knows? I can't tell you which one is true here. Here's what Axios says they're watching anyway. Any arrangement benefiting Democrats who helped the bill pass could further inflame far-right Republicans already incensed about the compromise bill that McCarthy cut with Biden. They've accused the speaker of caving to most of Democrats' demands and not cutting enough government spending. And then Chip Roy appears here again, reacting to news that Democrats would try to squeeze McCarthy on earmarks, tweeted derisively, "Earmarks? Sell, sell, sell. Hashtag no deal," except that they did get a deal. And Chip Roy has been completely ineffective in his position on this. And so maybe the market says hold while he's yelling sell, and he either will continue to yell sell and actually sell and lose his shirt, or yell sell but actually hold. And hopefully all of his minions will be the ones who take a bath when they sell by listening to his stupid advice, whereas he's actually holding, and then he'll be exposed as a hypocrite. I don't know. But at any rate, it'll be interesting to see. And you won't know until appropriations bills are formed whether or not, and how will you even be able to tell whether Democrats are getting more than you would have thought they would have gotten, because you never can tell exactly where crazy Republicans are going to come down on appropriations for Democratic districts. They would say zero, but it's never been zero, no matter how crazy the Republicans get. Okay, so that is something to watch and something to keep in mind. What else can we sneak in here before closing out? I guess the thing we ought to mention is the thing I haven't gotten to yet, and we'll go to The Guardian for that one, if I can actually read the article. This is I guess this is the development that other shows might lead with, because it's Trump and treason and the stupid classified documents that he stole. And this is what people are talking about on that front today. Hugo Lowell reporting for The Guardian. Trump regretted not declassifying retained military document in recording. That's the headline. But of course, remember that he claimed that all things were declassified just by thinking about it. This is actually evidence, I suppose, that even he knew he was lying about the declassification thing. Federal prosecutors have obtained audio in which the former president acknowledged he retained a classified paper on Iran. Federal prosecutors got that recording of a summer 2021 meeting where Trump suggested he should, which means he didn't, have declassified a military document about Iran he admitted retaining, according to people familiar with the criminal investigation into this whole thing. The document at issue is understood to be classified as secret, significant as the Justice Department typically prefers to charge espionage cases involving retention of materials at that level, rather than top secret papers that might be too sensitive or confidential papers that are too low. So it sort of occupies a sweet spot here. Isn't that interesting? Well, you'd think they'd want to prosecute you for stealing top secret documents, mostly, right? Rather than just secret, quote unquote, just secret. But as it turns out, the complication is, well, if we prosecute him for retaining a top secret document, then we have to tell people what the top secret document is, or at least hint at what it is in order to use it as evidence against them. And that's dangerous all by itself, and let's avoid that. Whereas, well, if he just kept confidential, well, juries won't care about that because that's not very significant. But secret documents are important enough to prosecute and not important enough to have to worry too much about having to reveal what's in it in order to make the case. Wow, that's pretty dumb. Anyway, the recording was made at Trump's Bedminster Golf Club in July of 2021 when the former president met with people helping his former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, write a book by his aide, Margot Martin, who regularly taped conversations with authors to ensure they accurately recounted his remarks. Another complication. For several minutes in the audio recording, the sources said Trump talks about how he cannot discuss the document because he no longer possesses the sweeping presidential power to declassify now that he's out of office, but suggests that he should have done so when he was still in the White House, even though he later sort of claimed that he kind of sort of maybe did. So contradicting himself, and that's awful dumb as well. But the previously unreported suggestion that he should have declassified the document presents a potentially perilous moment, as it indicates Trump knew that he had retained material which remained sensitive to national security, as well as the limitations on discussing it with unauthorized people. CNN earlier reported that prosecutors had that recording. Prosecutors in the office of Special Counsel Jack Smith appeared to have obtained the recording around March as the criminal investigation targeting Trump intensified, yes, and numerous Trump aides were subpoenaed to testify before the federal grand jury hearing evidence in the case in Washington. Well, time to play the outro music. The tape was played to multiple witnesses, including Martin, when she testified in mid-March after having her laptop and phones imaged by prosecutors. The first time the Trump lawyers learned about the tape was after Martin testified. One of the sources said that must have been disappointing to them. In the book titled A Chief's Chief, Meadows recounts how Trump once recalled a 4-page report produced by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Mark Milley that contained his plan to attack Iran, though it is unclear if that was the same meeting attended by his writers. It gets complicated at this point, but basically they now have tape of Trump saying all that you would need in order to illustrate that he understood the stakes of how these documents were supposed to be handled and refused to do so anyway. And all of his dumb stories about having mentally declassified these things are also now acknowledged on tape to have been untrue all along. So that's an interesting development. We'll probably be talking about that more as time goes on. In the meantime, Justice Putnam may be discussing it as well on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, which comes up next. Let's see. He's actually going to start with the just impeached Texas Attorney General Paxton, now suing the Democratic stronghold of Harris County back in 2020 to block the use of universal mail-in ballots, and he's bragging about it.
Radio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Yeah, you know, it's a good thing he's going to spend some time on that one, because that's a bit of a blockbuster, too. Basically, Paxton is running around saying he's claiming that he saved Texas for Trump by, invalidating a number of Harris County ballots in order to win Texas for the Republicans. That sounds rather amazing and unbelievable all by itself.